Hello, good evening, and welcome to another 8 p.m. live stream. So, first of all, as you join, I just want to welcome you all to the stream. Normal procedure, so whichever platform you're watching this on, be it Twitter, Periscope, YouTube, Facebook, share this one, spread the word, and hopefully as many people as possible will join in what will be an action-packed hour. And my guests tonight, I'm very pleased to welcome Robert and Niall. Robert is the director of the Bruges Group, and obviously I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the Bruges Group. If you're not, shame on you, you should be. And then Niall himself is a senior lecturer in mental health at King's College London, and of course a contributor on all kinds of topics on all kinds of forums. So very pleased to have you two guys here with me. I'm just going to start bringing up the comments here as they stream in. What we're here tonight to talk about, folks, is that Robert and Niall have come out with a really interesting book called Moralitis. Moralitis, a cultural virus in this year of viruses. Just what you needed, another book about a virus. But nonetheless, it's here, and the authors are with me tonight. So, Robert and Niall, first of all, you're both very welcome.
Thanks for having us on.
Okay, so first of all, perhaps shall we set it up? Because people are going to want to know fundamentally, moralitis. What is it, Robert?
Moralitis is a virus that's been put into our society. It's a pathogen, one that doesn't work so much on the body, more on the mind. The idea is to undermine the traditions of Western Europe, the Judeo-Christian inheritance, and things that common people cling to and support and anchor themselves to, such as their family, their faith, and their flag. And the aim of this virus is to undermine those institutions which we cherish so dear, I mean, so important in protecting and upholding our society and making the West the success that it has been. The idea is to undermine them. Originally, it was put out there to make because they believed they couldn't understand really why people in advanced economies didn't accept socialism, didn't accept communist revolution. They thought it was because people clung to such traditions. They thought we had to destroy those institutions. And this is something they put out there that the Frankfurt School developed. People who we call cultural Marxists try to create revolutions in society to undermine that very same society, to undermine civilization, as it were, to make way for a communist revolution, doing the disorder that would all happen, what we see on the streets sometimes of London, and of course quite often in the United States of America. The aim is being driven, or the aim of this is to drive forward a communist revolution. It's no surprise that the Black Lives Matter organization actually is anti-patriarchal, anti-capitalist. It has a clear agenda. And part of this is, of course, to make way for socialism, to smash anything that's gone before. Of course, the virus is mutated. It's taken on a life of its own. Some people are infected. Some people are agents. Niall can speak about this very fluently as well. But of course, some people just are putting out ideas that show they've been infected with moralitis, that their thought process has been corrupted because they may well be scared. They may be scared of saying anything different, or they may just think there's just an advantage in being woke, that there is a social advantage and an opportunity for socio-economic progress to be made if indeed they spout the nonsensical stuff that we see coming out of almost every single institution within this country.
Well, I mean, actually, Niall, that's the point, really, because I don't think there's ever been a moment like this time in our history, actually, when a form of, I don't know, collective insanity or derangement seems to be afflicting right across the spectrum, you know, across media, across commerce, across education, academia. It's never really felt this intense. And that's why I think, you know, your book is so well timed, because it's almost inexplicable in terms of how has this all come together in this moment where it seems like natural to want to tear down Churchill's statue. Yeah, it seems natural to, basically race bait certain races, and that's all okay. That's all good and fine. Niall, how fundamentally, how can this be? How has this come to happen?
Well, I think it's something that we're asked, or something that causes some confusion for people around this concept of moralitis as a cultural virus. Is that on the one hand we're talking about, like Robert's just been talking about, the deliberate attempts to undermine Western society, the sort of cultural Marxist project. And on the other hand, we're talking about people who have been infected with this virus, which is spread by memes rather than microbes. So it seems that on the one hand, we've got something deliberate going on with agency. On the other hand, we're talking about something in which people are passive recipients of some illness. So how do we square that? And I think it's important to note that most people who have moralitis are merely carriers of the disease. So these are not people who would consider themselves to be cultural Marxists at all. They would frown, or they'd look at you quite baffled if you were to say that to your average middle-class student or graduate who, you know, pushes this woke ideology. They would think, well, I'm certainly not a Marxist, never mind a cultural Marxist. But what we've seen as yeah, well, I mean, Robert, you mentioned this, the Black Lives Matter agenda. And I think what's happened is that when we were writing the book, people would say, what on earth is this cultural Marxism thing? It's very elusive. It sounds a bit like a conspiracy theory. But actually, you only need to look at the Black Lives Matter agenda, and it is nakedly cultural Marxist. It's anti-Zionist, pro-Palestine, anti-patriarchy, pro-transgenderism. It's defund the police. It's smash capitalism. These are slogans that are all entirely interchangeable with other movements such as Extinction Rebellion, the elements of the Remain campaign to stop Brexit, the Occupy anti-globalization movement from 20 years ago, interchangeable. And that's because Black Lives Matter is a front organization for cultural Marxism. Now, you could go back to the 1920s when cultural Marxism began with the critical theorists in the Frankfurt School. And somebody around at that time was Willy Münzenberg, who created several front organizations that would attract broad support, attract the educated people who would normally be deterred by overtly revolutionary activism. So dress these causes up in nice sounding movements, like, you know, who would say that Black lives don't matter? Who would say that the environment doesn't matter? So, but BLM has given the game away. They have done what cultural Marxists have always been clever not to do. You see, when I said to you a few moments ago that most young people who support this woke ideology wouldn't by in any means call themselves cultural Marxists, and yet they are pushing a cultural Marxist agenda. That is a success, the tremendous success of the stealth and the subterfuge of cultural Marxism, that it doesn't give the game away. It doesn't let too many people know what it's really up to. And of course, BLM has dramatically failed in that and shown what the movement is really about.
Well, actually, just on that, Robert, going back to you, BLM, just on take a minute or so on them. One of the things that amazes me, and it is to Niall's point, but BLM in some ways is overtly Marxist. I mean, anyone, you just got to go to the website and they make it clear what they want to do. You know, smash the patriarchy, smash the family, and yet And here's the curiosity: we've got large corporations like the Premier League, like Formula One, and I mean they're all taking a knee in compliance to Black Lives Matter. Is that, Robert, because they don't really understand what it is they're taking a knee to? And if that's the case, how have they all been conned?
Well, to see how far that cultural Marxism and the Moralitis virus has spread, you only need to switch on the BBC News or CNN, or now even Sky News, and of course that whole paplanary of cartel, as it were, of social media. This has really gone far beyond just our teaching institutions or our universities. It's now penetrated the police, believe it or not, and of course our media institutions. The BBC fell a long time ago. Now the Silicon Valley has really firmly subscribed to this ideology. Partly they don't know; they're just scared of being criticised. It is like in Eastern Europe or in the Soviet Union, where people, of course, had the official truth that they were told and the lines that they had to parrot. And if they wanted to have the opportunity of having a car, of getting a good job, getting promotion, they had to parrot these lines. Privately, they would think very, very differently. And we see the same sort of tactics used over here to try and control our speech. George Orwell was really clear about this in 1984 when he was writing about the left and the transnational, supranational nature of government that was emerging and how intolerant the left was. He knew the language tricks that they employed, banning certain words and making people parrot certain lines. And it's very, very powerful and very easy for people to fall into that trap. And really, corporations will do it because they are afraid of being criticised. Also, the young 20-something with purple hair who just happens to have their job running their social media may well think that the issues that they're tweeting about are the most important things to people. I say they're not. Most people will always be more concerned with their family, the schooling of their children, paying their mortgage and having a good job. Whereas, of course, these social issues are all encompassing, and it's a very, very attractive narrative. And so they fall into this trap. Partly, of course, it's all very convenient. It fits in with their corporate social responsibility. Whilst these cartels, essentially, or near monopolies in terms of sort of social media, are all kind of interchangeable, and media companies who will be very incestuous in their staff and in the networks that they keep, whilst they're trying their best to avoid paying tax or avoid regulation, they don't want you to look at that. They don't, woke capitalism rests on, don't look at how we haven't paid our corporation tax, how we've used the international tax law to make it look like we've not made any profits despite being billion-pound entities. Look at how we are supporting this. Look at how we are good people because we are on the side of these people who are victims. And this is the whole victim and oppressor narrative. This comes, in a sense, from Marxism, which had class-based analysis that people were poor because people were rich. And it's now been morphed into people are disadvantaged because of their race and people are prosperous, privileged even, because of their ethnicity or even the color of their skin, which is completely bogus. And it's all very simple narrative to put out there. But it's a perversion of, in a sense, traditional socialist beliefs and traditional, even original economic Marxism. But of course, it's taken that rationale, it's taken that look at the world and created one where there is conflict, where instead of uniting people, deliberately dividing, and that, of course, is the aim. But some people will find it ever so useful because it makes them seem cutting edge. Woke would have originally been a compliment, before, of course, we got hold of the word and showed what it really was about. So there's also there's an economic advantage to them, and the fact that say for instance in China, if you want to have the right to travel, if you want to have the opportunity to get on, your social media will be monitored, and the state will come down on you if you write the wrong things. If your social media activity, that is an organized system that they have there, and it's very effective at quashing dissent. Here we have an informal system where, of course, if you say the wrong thing on social media, you can still be arrested. And we point this out in Moralitis, that the police will arrest more than 3,000 people a year for breaching the Electronic Communications Act, subsection of that, and sort of a very broad definition of hate speech, let alone how the police will even be knocking on someone's door against their own rules. So we have an informal system, and if you want to get on in the school system, in education, and perhaps even get a job in the city of London, you have to be parroting these simplistic lines and what would be called politically correct. So we have an unofficial system here that if you don't want to be criticised, if you don't want to even be arrested here, you must parrot the correct lines, or at least not say things which were previously in previous generations, just perhaps even a few years ago, deemed to be common sense and something of fair part of public discourse. Now, of course, it's a very different world, and it's a very intolerant world driven by how the left, just like in 1984, have got control of social media and trying to control the narrative, the word that we use.
Yeah, no, they absolutely have. Niall, just turning to, I enjoyed in the book, you've got a symptoms of moralitis, a little paragraph which I thought was really good, and I just want to read it out, and then we can talk. These folks are the symptoms of moralitis. Have you noticed them? Corrupted rationalism, infantile reasoning, inflexibility of thought and expression, language constraint, which we just talked about with Robert, cultural self-loathing, and a reflexive intolerance of conflicting beliefs. Now, that kind of sums up an awful lot of what we're presented with at the moment, Niall, doesn't it, really? Because that to me is just so manifestly evident, but it's everywhere.
Yes, indeed, and these are symptoms which are suggestive of a delusional disorder. But we mustn't forget that some of the behaviors of moralitis are actually rewarding. So the classic one, of course, is virtue signaling, which is a term that only in the last year or two, much more people have become aware of. We were talking about this a long time ago, but now it's become common parlance, this idea that people show how sophisticated they are in their reasoning. Yeah. So Black Lives Matter, of course, has been a major opportunity for white middle-class progressives to show just how sophisticated they are. And there are rewards in that, the rewards that Robert has alluded to around in your career, you're much more likely to get promoted if you parrot the right slogans and if you virtue the right signals. So some of the symptoms are actually things that people do, and almost consciously. But there are other aspects of moralitis which I think are suggestive of a far more delusional state in which people are not really consciously doing what's actually good for them. And I think that just generally, moralitis is a state where white middle-class people particularly support things that are counter to their own interests. I mean, we talk in the book about mass immigration, for example. Yeah. Mass immigration certainly doesn't help the white middle class. It didn't before the coronavirus economic crisis. It certainly doesn't now. You have a scarcity of jobs, increasing competition for housing, green taxes, ethnicity quotas. There's all sorts of things that people support through this progressive woke ideology that are actually contrary to their own interests. But of course, it's a
that's exactly.
I was going to say it's a much overused.
But through that, they have an
opportunity. If I just say, it's a much overused cliche about feeding the crocodile, isn't it, David?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you've had lots of people on your show use that analogy, but I think that it really is the case that the white middle class woke generation are, but by this sort of virtue signaling and all those other symptoms that you've mentioned, it is like a way of feeding the crocodile so that you don't get eaten, because there are other people who you can point to get eaten first. Look at all those nasty Brexit voters over there, for example. You know, feed them to the crocodile. Look at all these people that have got Victorian or 1950s attitudes about gender, or people who are transphobic. You know, let's feed them to the crocodile first. But of course, the whole apparatus of identity politics is a house built on sand. You know, it will fall apart under the weight of its contradictions. I mean, these conflicts cannot be ignored, cannot be kind of swept under the carpet forever. And now you're starting to see real outbreaks of conflict between, you know, what traditional Muslims want and what the transgenderists want. So this is going to break out more and more into warfare.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is like the Judean People's Popular Front versus the People's Front of Judea, to a degree, insofar as they do. But Robert, you know, I just find it so strange that we see, actually, it's not just a UK phenomenon. This is a kind of global thing, because we see it so evident in the States at the moment. We see it down in Australia. We see it. You know, it's across the world. You know, isn't it strange that it seems to be 2020? This thing has just come right up like the veritable COVID-19, pathogen, and it seems to be destroying the essences of our pluralistic democracies. I mean, it's so strange. It's crystallized in 2020. To what do you attribute that?
Well, the aims. This isn't actually new, and you made reference to the Judean People's Front. There was a sketch of in that where Monty Python, The Life of Brian, where of course John Cleese was asking his fellow revolutionary about who wanted to self-identified as a woman, about where would the baby gestate. You don't have a womb. He's going to gestate in a cardboard box, is what he said. That was a joke then. It's now a matter of public policy. It is now a matter of state and accepted truth in the law in various countries, from Canada, and here you'll be criticised, in the United States even, if indeed you just point out that the other person is of their sex is either male or female. They have, you know, according to their chromosomes, and that is the case for everybody, every man and woman that is on this planet, regardless of this very small minority that might be intersect and have characteristics of both. But of course, this is Neil was sort of speaking about how the mental gymnastics of some of these people. That's one of the attractions, to show your sophistication, to show how sophisticated you are and how prosperous you are, and how different you are to ordinary working people who will be wedded to the idea of common sense and calling things as they see them. To be in favour of the transgender movement, Islamic immigration, gay rights, for instance, as well, all things which are, and feminism, all of which are to a degree mutually exclusive. We see the conflicting attitudes and conservative societies, very strongly conservative societies, that many migrants would be coming from to this country. Yet the feminists would be marching in favour of Palestine or various Islamic countries. Of course, people would often speak about the feminist movement and the transgender movement, ignoring the fact that on occasions they meet for punch-ups in Hyde Park, and I'm not making that up. It's these things are mutually exclusive, but to come out at a dinner party and to talk about all these things and how important they are, even though they, in a sense, seek to undermine each other, is a way of showing your mental gymnastics and a way of showing how you can say the most preposterous things, but at the same time, only a very small minority of people that have gone through the education system and prospered, and of course are from well-off backgrounds, who do not have to worry if, of course, the society has been wrecked by, of course, riots on the streets, by Black Lives Matter protests or Extinction Rebellion, stopping people get to work. It's the very well-off people won't be actually harmed by that, the very middle-class people who are upper middle class. But, of course, they will have the opportunity to show how they are different from ordinary working people. And it is no surprise that Black Lives Matter are targeting shops owned by just normal or run by just normal people from all walks of life. It was no surprise that Extinction Rebellion, when they stopped people to try and go to work, they chose Canning Town, a working class part of East London. They must keep the hoi polloi in line. That's one of their aims. They want to show how they are better. Once, of course, we have ideology in our society, and we have what Niall and I have moulded the term of affluenza, which was originally meant how people were wedded to their sort of material well-being. Now, of course, with the proliferation of technology, the internet, with, of course, people being able to access information and experience things like foreign holiday, or previously could experience foreign holidays before the government did their best to try and ban them through quarantine and measures of questionable rationality. People could show their wealth by owning a car or wearing a nice watch, being able to speak French, for instance. They would be able to differentiate themselves from ordinary working people. That is now very, very different. But now the way to show that you've been to university and that you've got a good job, a good white-collar job, is to play those mental gymnastics. And instead of Mrs. Bucket at her dinner party talking about how she's inviting the cousin of some minor aristocrat, she'll be talking about Black Lives Matter and transgenderism and gay rights and the feminist movement. All might be very worthy in their own right, but of course, put them all together, you create a mess that only some people can manage to put together. And it's like the courtly rules that would govern aristocratic or royal families, or in, say, for instance, in Japan, where there would be a particular way of behavior, a particular way of talking, speaking, sitting, the clothes you wore, to differentiate yourself from the lower orders. Now, woke politics, Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion, all those things, the BBC News, it's all a way of showing how you're better. And we have had this condescending attitude in many different countries towards those who are of more disadvantaged backgrounds, that can either express itself in terms of being very patronizing, such as saying, oh, you are like this because of the oppression that someone's ethnicity has imposed on other people, which rather than the choices that they make, and at the same time they differentiate themselves from their ordinary people who won't be interested in parroting these ridiculous lines that we are often our children are often being taught in school all the way upwards to university and in the workplace, with some HR officer who's saying we must, and someone who handles the company's social media saying our biggest focus isn't about making a profit anymore or giving our staff, it's all about pushing them into diversity training and subconscious or unconscious bias, and looking through ways in which just like someone in New York would show how sophisticated they are in the 1980s by saying how they were going to see a shrink, which was something to boast about. Now the way to show how sophisticated they are is to say how their workforce isn't diverse enough, how even though the NHS may be 20% BAME, or BME and the health service, way overrepresented. They're not represented, but the BBC, 16%, way more than the population. But still, the way to show the sophistication is to talk about these things, because it differentiates themselves from the simple folk, say for instance on the council estate, who need to be kept in their place. That's their way of thinking.
I think that also explains, doesn't it, Niall? Like, I remember back to Brexit for a moment, and since Brexit actually, the castigation of the, if you like, the working class British people who made it clear that they wanted to leave the European Union, and all we've had is these, middle class tossers, with their third-rate degrees coming out and lecturing them on how stupid. I mean, it couldn't be more hateful in some regards. The fact that they all assume a moral pulpit and they then happily lecture all the little working class plebs in their minds, i.e. people who contribute to society unlike them. And that's been very evident since 2016, the fact there's that snobbishness. And actually, to Robert's point, that it's those middle-class intelligentsia in places like the BBC, places like Sky, ITV, I mean, they're all the same. It's pretty shocking to see this inverted snobbishness and false intellectual preening from some of these people, isn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, I having worked in a university for nearly 20 years, I've come on a journey really where I perhaps, when I started at the university as a much younger chap, I probably had some of that snobbery myself without really properly being aware of it. But I did become more and more aware of it, and I would say up to about 5 years ago, prior to the Brexit, the EU referendum campaign, I would say there was a disdain for the lower middle class. Yeah. There was a little bit of a patronizing attitude, I would say, for the working class. So a Sun reader would get a little bit more sympathy than a Daily Mail reader, because the most hated class of all for the bien pensant class, the intelligentsia, is the lower middle class. Those people who are aspiring to be something better than they should really be. I don't know if you remember the film Abigail's Party, but that was it was a classic. And that was from a kind of upper middle class perspective, wasn't it? Looking at these awful lower middle class people, pretend, the chap with all the Beethoven records that he'd never even listened to, but he had them there on the rack in the lounge, and their kind of bigoted ideas and all that. That's the way that the lower middle class is seen. But I think what happened with the EU referendum is suddenly these two groups got put together. So whereas the working class could at least be respected for having the moral sense to vote Labour, the lower middle class had gone out, they were the Tories, as sort of nasty, bigoted, backward-looking, blue rent shires, where properly sophisticated middle class people would vote for Labour or would vote for Liberal Democrats, certainly not the awful Tories. And what happened with the EU referendum is that sympathy for the working class disappeared, and that increasingly, of course, the Labour Party was becoming less and less representative of its original constituency. It was looking the other way from its traditional working class base, and I think that with the EU referendum, the white working class and the lower middle class got lumped in together, because it was those two groups that were the predominant support for Brexit. And it was a major slap in the face. And they're still smarting now that there were so many of these people were able to destroy this wonderful progressive future we were going to have in this globalized world of no borders, where we'd get rid of all this shameful imperial heritage and all that, and be much more modern and intelligent and tolerant and inclusive in our outlook. And suddenly, as somebody who woke up at the Glastonbury Festival shouted out on the 23rd, or was it the morning of the 24th of June, "Oh my God, I live in a racist country." And so what happened was, David, just to finish my answer to your question, is whereas I saw up to about 5 years ago disdain, now I see contempt. And I don't like it. I work in an environment where I see contempt for ordinary British people. Yeah.
I think that's that's apparent. I mean, in the book, Robert, it certainly details in the first couple of part 1 and part 2 essentially how it is that we've arrived at where we are. But I think that, and people can get the book, buy the book, and read that. But I think for me, one of the most interesting parts is really having recognized we face all these problems, right? So many problems. Well, how are we going to solve them? And of course, you've got some fantastic recommendations. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to go through these, because I can't believe anyone could disagree with anything that we're going to talk about now. But it's so meaningful, and it's worth taking the time to talk about it. Obviously, cancel culture, for example, it's complete. I mean, it's omnipresent. It's all over the place. People like me are very much at the end of. I mean, they want me cancelled because I'm a heretic from the narrative. Not just me, but I've had friends all over the place being wiped off social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and that's accelerating. So cancel culture is omnipresent. It's omnipresent actually in our universities as well, to a degree, I think. And we want to talk about that. But one of your first suggestions, which Robert, I wanted to chat about, is you say we've got to end cancel culture, and I'm sure everyone is going to go, yeah, right. How are we going to do it, Robert? Tell me.
Well, we put free speech at the core of everything and have a statute of liberty, which is all about people having the opportunity. It's not about the equality legislation we have at the moment, which has led to quotas and led to people being prosecuted for saying things which the state deems to be inappropriate. We need to be celebrating freedom. That needs to come before everything else. And freedom of speech, I'm convinced, is the next big thing. That's the next big movement that companies need to get into now. If they want to seem cutting edge, if any politicians want to be brave, then they need to be supporting freedom of speech. And we've seen this cancel culture, not just at the level of universities or Nick Clegg's Facebook wiping out various people's pages or sending them to a Facebook jail for 3 days. It's even been existent in the Conservative Party. Roger Scruton, the late Roger Scruton, Professor Roger Scruton, who's now passed away, of course, he was cancelled by the Conservative Party, by the Conservative government, just for when he was on a committee about the built environment, something which he is a philosopher in, amongst many other disciplines. So this, of course, in what was ultimately a put-up job, where things he had said were twisted out of their original context, which we have all experienced, I am sure.
Yes.
And so this is something that's become all-pervading, and it needs to end for very good reason, not just for the abstract sake of someone's liberty, but also if we can't have honest, frank discussions based on evidence, then we are really in trouble. That's the problem with authoritarian regimes, is that people are afraid to speak out. And they don't have the opportunity to innovate. They don't have the opportunity to warn and say that's not a good idea. And say, for instance, in the civil service, if you're in these countries, if you come up with a new idea, you're likely to actually lose your job. Whereas, of course, traditionally in the private sector, in a free world where freedom of speech pervaded everything, then of course you actually coming up with a new idea would be something that would be very beneficial to the company. Now, of course, we're in an environment where debate has been really restricted, and people are afraid to speak out. People can, whole industry has developed around false narratives regarding how one group is victimized by another, which is oppressing them. So really, this is very, very important that we need to get to grips with this issue, because otherwise we will not be able to have a meritocracy. We would not be able to have one where people can move forward and where the best solutions are developed, because this is all about restricting thought, and that's what we need to overcome. So one of the main ideas is a statute of liberty to do that, and we need to restrict the funding of universities who are restricting freedom of speech. We need to allow the universities to be places of thought again, whereas at the moment they're just places where they're deeply intolerant of those who have alternative ideas, which actually may be based on rational debate and even evidence, rather than just parroting the lines of the cultural Marxist establishment, which has pretty much taken over the university sector. So that's one of the key things that we need. And of course, we need to call out wokeness. We need a woke finder general to deal with moralitis and public health emergency. Far more people have died as a result of communism and state socialism than coronavirus will ever kill. That's the truth of the matter. And and even all those movements, they come ultimately, even communism. Lenin was sort of quite clear about this in What Is to Be Done. He had a condescending, dismissive attitude towards working class people. The movement that claims to be there for people of a working class background was nothing of the sort. It was all about keeping people in their box and telling them what is best for them and controlling their life by people who think they know better and who think they're morally superior, hence the term moralitis.
Well, I certainly agree with that. And can I just ask Niall then, because again, in some of your recommendations, it goes back to the problem of the education sector, from schools right the way through to universities, because that seems to be so rife with moralitis, those two areas. And I know you've got suggestions for, which Robert's just touched on briefly, for school reform and also for an inspectorate of universities. So can you just sort of talk us through where your thinking is with regard to this? Because I think it's a crucial area.
Well, I think just to take a step back, I think that a big part of our book is about practical remedies, which is important. This isn't just a book that describes the problem. There are so many of those books around. But by conceptualizing this wokeness as a cultural virus, we have taken, as Robert says, a sort of public health approach to this. And as you'll know, with any public health problem, the first priority is awareness. People need to be aware that there's a problem. I mean, that's what they're trying to do with obesity at the moment, isn't it? People have to accept that it really is a problem, and the difficulty that we've had on sort of our side of the fence is that much of what's going on, polite society doesn't really want to make much of it at all. It's not really a big problem. Oh, young people will grow out of it. That's the kind of thinking that you'll often hear. So what we need to do is, and I think the Black Lives Matter has been brilliant for us, because it's really shown just how nasty and destructive this movement is. And so, it's not just about our heritage, our statues and things like that are at risk. It's a whole structures and traditions and rituals, and all the glue that keeps society together is being severely damaged by this woke ideology. So the first thing is awareness. And I think that's why the Black Lives Matter has been so good, because it's really made a lot more people aware of what's happening here. And of course, people are also watching the riots in American cities at the moment.
Yes.
And and you know, not many people really can believe that this is all Donald Trump's making. This is all what people are doing to try and stop Donald Trump and to pursue this longer term destructive Marxist agenda. So first thing, awareness. Second is a program of intervention, and Robert's already mentioned some of the things that we need to do. And I think one of the things which is a very helpful approach to take is to start using their own language, their own kind of methods against them. So, for example, David, you no doubt will have been attacked by the likes of Hope Not Hate in the past, or people that your friends, people on your that you've had on your program. I think with universities, just to develop the point made by Robert, is we need to stop funding hate, because young people are going into these courses, and it's not just social sciences. It's almost all courses now. Or anyone at university gets put through basically a madrasa in this woke ideology. Now, you could have a lesson on statistics, for example, in social science. You know, I did a social science master's degree, and all of the exercises, all of the examples that were given were about, we're pushing the ideology about like gender pay gap, etc. So, for example, there was one exercise where we were learning how to show with statistics that black people are more likely than white people to be victims of crime. Now, that's true, and the evidence clearly shows that. But black people are also far more likely to be the perpetrators of crime. So if you look at the murder rates in the UK, it's something like 4 times the rate of the percentage of population of black people who are convicted, who commit homicide. Now, can you imagine a social science lecturer doing an exercise in which that is the that is the finding? Or indeed, if a student wrote an essay in which they were to show that that there's a much higher than expected proportion of black people who are involved in murder. No. So I think that universities, it's so important that we stop funding these grievance studies courses, and that universities need to stop putting resources into all these diversity and inclusion officers, stop giving all this money to people pushing agendas like Black Lives Matter. Get back to doing what a university is about. You know, the idea of the university based on Enlightenment values. And, a classic text on this was John Newman. Back in the 19th century, he wrote about the idea of the university. Now, my experience with most students today is, unfortunately, that they no longer have any appreciation or respect for Enlightenment values. And I think the 3 values that are so important are democracy. Well, clearly that wasn't important because there was so much effort to overturn the democratic vote by all these contemptibles in the provinces. So democracy is not respected. Freedom of speech, well, say no more about that. And then equality before the law. No, they want moral relativism. They really want a situation where some people of particular identity groups get favorable justice. And I think that the Enlightenment values are so important to the mission of the university. And I think what the government needs to do is go beyond just a simple carrot and stick approach about ensuring freedom of speech on campus. I think the university needs to make sure, the government needs to make sure that our universities once again become places that promote Enlightenment values. And to do that, they need to stop relying on 30% of their students coming from China, for example. I mean, it's good. It's great to have the students from China, don't get me wrong. But you know what I'd rather see? I'd rather hear a little more Cockney and Scouse and Geordie in the university canteens rather than whole tables of students talking in Mandarin. You know, these are British universities. Their priority should be British students, and their priority should be promoting Enlightenment values, which is the cornerstone of a civil democracy.
I entirely agree. And the irony of having Chinese students from the Communist China Party regime omnipresent is something that somewhat alarms me. But actually, Robert,
and they will be taught by their lecturers about how unjust, how discriminatory, how dreadful our society is, and they will go back to China and they won't be saying, oh, we need Western democracy. So we need to be nothing like the West because they are just absolutely awful. I heard it from my professor, which is of course just absolutely bogus, because of course the professor is spinning a line that's furthered his career, and of course all subjects, even the study of icebergs, need to be now understood in the context of race and gender. And I'm not, again, that's actually, I'm not actually making that up. So all the time we're having these foreign students, they're not learning good things about Britain, schools would, where people from overseas would be given the opportunity to see the majesty and the great things that this country has contributed to the world and can continue to contribute. They're now learning a twisted version of our history that's designed to undermine us from within.
But the thing, agreed. But isn't it interesting, Robert, that we've talked plenty about universities now, but the step before that, the schools themselves, and I mean your recommendation that we need to stop funding hate, for example. We've got groups like Hope Not Hate, Tell Mama, some of these which I consider hard, radical Marxist groups. And other groups, other even more bizarre, if that's possible, groups than that. We've got trans people coming in to put on shows in primary schools, and so the area that leads up to university, that the primary secondary education area itself, it's also become full of moralitis. It's replete with moralitis as well. So in terms of that area, I mean, what do you think we need to do, primary school, secondary school, to fix the wrong that's there?
Well, there's this whole sort of concept of transgenderism and how people are, in some cases, just because they may be feminine or masculine and have traits of someone, or of course they're just being pushed down a route. And this is so bad what is actually happening that even BBC's Newsnight has done a number of exposés on the Tavistock Clinic and how there is most likely a problem where children who, it is natural for children to be confused when they are young, or indeed when they are in their teens, about how children who are given puberty blockers as if they have something wrong with them are then pushed, in a sense, down this route of gender transition, where, of course, many people may be incredibly unhappy and have a great percentage of suicide. And it's so bad that even BBC's Newsnight, which is a rather a left-leaning show, with economics editors who are often from the economic advisory trade unions and pushing every kind of anti-Brexit propaganda you can imagine, has called this out. This has sort of begun to run away. And I've actually seen articles in The Guardian where they're saying, hang on a minute, this is going a bit too far. And that's the nature of moralitis. It then has this wokeness arms race, this wokeness escalation, where, of course, once someone was radical just by saying that women should have the same opportunities as men. But of course, now to have the benefit, the social reward of of showing how enlightened, how progressive you are, how woke you are. You need to be ever more radical, and so these things accelerate, and it becomes ever more ridiculous, and he's spinning rapidly out of control. And some people who unleashed it are actually thinking this is going far too far. And we now see many feminists who are campaigning for freedom of speech because they are deeply concerned about how the thing which they identify with most, that the issue of being their identity as being a woman, is now threatened, and now anyone can self-identify as whatever they want to be, and that completely undermines their politics. And many people are now thinking this is going very exceedingly too far. In some cases, it is the actions where the children, on one hand, well, it may be the children being pushed medication they should not be having, to of course, something which is actually undermining the fabric of our society.
Niall,
I think you wanted to come in there.
Yes, I think that we've said a lot about just how bad this this condition is, and I think that's important because people need to be aware just how destructive this ideology is, and it's caused a delusional syndrome where people are lacking in insight. But I think we also need to be positive, and I think the book does actually have an optimistic message at the end. And if I could just say from my own experience of working in a university, that I do see some green shoots coming through. Typically, they are students who are of non-white British background, students of Black or Asian background, typically, who some of them mixed race, who feel that they can actually contest this more, because I find with most white middle-class students, this is much more about fear than fervor. They are what we call carriers in the book. They don't really deep down support all this sort of thing, but they feel they have to go along with it. And there are a few young students coming through who are bucking against this now. And they need to have quite a thick skin, but there are some that do enjoy the tussle. They do enjoy people barracking them. They enjoy it because what they see is that when people are attacking them in this ad hominem way, simply for expressing their view, they see that other side doesn't really have an argument. And I think that's a positive thing. There are green shoots coming through, but it's not enough to rely on that, because they can't really create a critical mass. These are often, you might get one or two people on a course who are like that. So there are all kinds of things in the book that we feel should be done, practical things that need to be done to help reverse the damage that's been done by Moralitis. And I think that there's a growing number of people throughout society, educated people, who realize now that this is actually a very destructive turn that society has taken, and we need to start turning it around.
These people who are bold enough and brave enough to speak out and use their common sense and talk about just evidence-based arguments and base what they're saying on facts rather than the abuse that the other side use, which is a deliberate tactic. These people will captivate others, and they can act as antibodies within society to cure us. And we have these people that are emerging, that are pointing an alternative way and just basing their arguments on fact. And these people are antibodies which will help cure. And we need to create an environment where the antibodies can flourish, where they can have and that is, of course, allowing freedom of speech and stopping the cancel culture. And ultimately, we will find an antidote to this disease. And partly that antidote is, of course, the book Moralitis, a cultural virus. That is part of the antidote. That will actually help build up our people's society's immune system to this disease. countries such as Eastern European states, where the Conservatives in Poland recently won an election, or of course we have the Fidesz party of Viktor Orban in government, someone who is an avowed Christian and someone who is a conservative. Is just those nations, they've been inoculated. They've already had their inoculations, and they've been vaccine against cultural Marxism, although the threat is still being posed, because they were occupied by communism for 40 years, and they've experienced it, and they aren't going to fall for the same tricks, because they know what they are. We thankfully didn't have that same affliction put upon us in the West, and that's why in countries like Britain and the United States, they're falling for it. But it's countries now, such as Poland and Hungary, that are showing the way. And Hungary itself has managed to reverse the demographic decline. It's more people now are being married, and I think there's a sort of a movement there which is primarily conservative, which will ultimately lead to a society that is capable of surviving. And people, the younger generation here, Generation Z, I suspect are coming through, are actually far more conservative in their outlook. They've seen that the damage that the liberal society and permissive society has done to their to their middle class parents' lives, and they reject the hysteria of the millennials. And I think coming through, there is real hope that the younger generation below people below coming through society at the moment will actually be the hope, and they will be looking to say things differently and questioning the authoritarian nature of the woke establishment. So I think we can be very positive, but only if we can't just let this won't cure itself. The situation will get further and further out of control until, of course, we have this environment that our book and our policy proposals in Moralitis are trying to create, where we'll actually have an environment where people will be able to speak their mind again.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Just to kind of finish off on, Niall, do you want to kind of pull together your sort of finishing thoughts?
Yes, well, Robert's mentioned movements in east of Europe. I think there's lots of positive developments in this country too. I think the Free Speech Union set up by Toby Young is a brilliant development. Different from me politically, but J.K. Rowling with the letter appealing for free speech. So you're starting to see a lot more resistance now against woke ideology in Britain. But I think that what's really important about our book, and it's a sort of shameless plug really, is that the book really describes how cultural Marxism has caused, through transmission of these woke memes, it's caused a delusional state in which so many of our supposedly educated people in society are completely immersed in it. And I think that maybe, as Robert was alluding to, maybe this younger generation coming through is starting to show signs of being more conservative, and hopefully not just being conservative, but actually being rebellious, being libertarian and rebelling against the stultifying straitjacket that they've been put under by the generation before them.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, actually. I mean, in one regard, the only point of being young is to rebel. But as you said, there's this kind of homogenous groupthink, and maybe it is a positive sign, Niall, that there are younger people coming along. I guess also younger people tend not to consume the same legacy media dross that say my generation does. So that I think that's a plus, actually, because they're less likely to be beguiled by the BBC. And even if Twitter and other platforms are a bit censorious, they still more or less allow our ideas to be put forward and to flourish and whatnot. So Robert, to sum up from your point of view then, so tell us, why should people buy your book?
You need to buy the book because we need to tell other people as well to buy a book. We need to send copies to our MPs because it has practical policy proposals about how we can save our society. This is a question of saving our civilization from the public health emergency out there that is Moralitis. So if people buy our book, they will have the arguments that they need to show. Not, you're never going to convince these woke propagandists that they're wrong, but of course you can show their whole thinking has been perverted by a virus, and through that they will start to see the error of their ways, and they'll hopefully open up their minds. But the more politicians that read our book, the more people that know about it, then of course what's going to happen is we're going to have some policy proposals which create the environment where we can start questioning again, where we can voice our views, where we can have policies based on rational discussion, and we will end the diversive identity politics, and we can unite as a country, because being your loyalty to your nation state, your identity within that nation state, that's the most inclusive identity we have. And the undermining of that for the nation state, of course, that's a deliberate tactic to make way for transnational and supranational forms of government. The deliberate undermining of that is creating division where it needn't be. So if we're going to have peace on our streets and a proper functioning society where all can benefit from the growth that a free country would have, they need to read our book and implement our policy proposals, because everything comes from essentially freedom of speech and the opportunity for us to talk out and question and put our views out there as we see fit.
So just to finish with, I'm just flipping up so everyone can see it. Moralitis, a cultural virus. There you see the book, folks. Just tell us, how can people get the book? Where can they buy it? Where do they need to go?
It can be bought on Amazon. It can be bought from online, from all good bookshops as well. But Amazon is one of the main places, of course, or through the Bruges Group. But if you want it within a day or two, go onto Amazon and get it out there. Make sure your MP reads it as well. It's got the policy proposals right at the start, so the MP who's ever so busy with his time, shaking hands and on being put on a course by Keir Starmer to look at their innate prejudices that they have towards people, and this
unconscious bias, Robert.
It's unconscious bias. Give them this book. Send it to your member of parliament, so they'll know the error of their ways and have some practical policy proposals they can put into place. Plus, of course, it is actually a really good read, and we show up in this for being the unhumorous organisation or the ideology that it is, where people have lost their sense of humour. We have this whole society where they say you can't say that, and where various comedians are thrown out, and audiences must think before they laugh at a certain joke if it's about a certain group. So let's come back to a society where we can talk our minds and just have a good laugh like we used to.
Well, I have to say, sorry, Niall, go ahead.
I was just going to say I could promote the book in just 5 words. Buy it before it's banned. Buy it before it's banned.
Well, guys, and to everyone watching this and who will watch this, I've read the book. I have to say, guys, I'm not saying it just because you're here. It's packed full of information. It's got there's so much more stuff we haven't even had a chance to get to, and the time's gone by. I want to talk about our armed forces and stuff like that, but just didn't get the time. So listen, folks, if you're please consider buying the book, reading the book, sharing the book. We do face the biggest virus this land faces is not COVID-19. coronavirus.
Yeah.
It is what Robert and Niall have identified and given a name to as moralitis. And I think all of us have a duty to do our best to fully gain an understanding of the origins, how it manifests, and then most importantly, as we've talked about latterly, the various positive cures and things that can be done to fight back against it. Our time is up, guys. It's gone, as I said it would do, all too quickly. We've gone a bit over, but that's absolutely fine. Listen, Robert, Niall, absolute pleasure to have you both on the show. Thank you very much. I hope you'll both come back. Thank you, everybody, for all the comments. Thanks for all the some very, you guys have won yourselves, I just flip up a comment. We'll buy the book. Moralitis, yeah, lots of positive feedback there, Robert and Niall. So that should be a few copies sold. And most importantly, again, thanks again for your time. Thanks, everyone. I'll be back tomorrow night. We're going to have a special on what we talked about earlier, actually, what's been happening in the United States, the peaceful protests that end up with, mass riots and courthouses being burnt down, etc., etc. So pull up a chair tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. We're going to tackle all things American. But in the meantime, thanks again, Robert. Thanks again, Niall. Thanks, everyone. See you here tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Bye for now.